Hey, this is Tim Ashe, President of the Vermont State Senate. It is Tuesday, April 14th. Thanks for joining me for my nightly update on Vermont's response to the coronavirus pandemic. I'm going to talk about two topics tonight. First, I'm going to reflect a little bit about how Vermont has been addressing one of the most vulnerable populations susceptible to the spread of a virus like COVID-19, and that's the homeless population. And we'll provide some insights into how Vermont's been handling that to prevent the types of outbreaks we've seen elsewhere. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the issue of hazard pay. This is the concept that is sometimes described as hero pay, hazard pay, a pay boost, a pay bump, something to recognize all the people who are doing frontline work and putting themselves at risk, but who might not be eligible for some of the boosts that people are getting on unemployment or certain supports that are going to come in from the federal government. And so I'll talk a little bit about the thinking right now going on in Vermont to hopefully find a way to provide some recognition and create some economic parity for those who are putting themselves at risk at this difficult time. I'm going to start with the issue of the homeless population in Vermont. As we know, there are not a small number of people who don't have a place to be at night for whatever reason. It is in a community like Burlington. There might be significantly higher numbers than elsewhere, but it's a problem throughout the state. And there are many who sleep outdoors, some of them alone, sometimes in more small groups. And then, of course, there are many who are in shelters of various types throughout the state that have been set up for people who want a roof over their head, but have no other options. And so you can imagine in some of the close quarters that our homeless shelters are forced to operate within, people are at very close proximity, and the idea of social distancing and constant hand washing sounds easy for those of us who have our own homes and easy access to bathroom facilities and so on. Not so easy if you're homeless. And I read an article in the New York Times a day or two ago by Nikita Stewart, and the headline was effectively a quote. The quote was, "It's a time bomb," and it referenced 23 dying in tightly packed shelters throughout New York City. And basically, the article expresses some version of what I just told you, that people have nowhere else to go in a time when food kitchens are shutting down because either it's not safe or they don't have volunteers who are able to show up. Public bathrooms are closed, all the restaurants and cafes closed, and it's driving many of our homeless into shelters even more than would normally be the case. And so in New York City, it has led to some pretty serious positive test outbreaks and 23 deaths of homeless people in shelters. And I just want to reflect a little bit about Vermont's proactive approach, and I think it's really been a testament to our network of nonprofit housing organizations and organizations that serve homeless people or people who are at risk of homelessness, that we were able to really get out in front of the rise of positive test cases to have something set up in the worst case scenario. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about how we've been handling that as a state. And most of this, it benefits from the foundation that is the result of many years of state policymaking and investments. However, the ingenuity of the people who actually work in these settings and for these organizations, that's where all the credit goes for the quick thinking, the nimbleness, and hopefully the positive results that we're going to see as a result of it. And I'm just going to give you a handful of examples of ways that Vermont has been addressing this issue to protect the very vulnerable homeless population. First off, the community health centers of Burlington, which is a bit of a misnomer because they're not just in Burlington, but it's a federally qualified health center, meaning it takes all comers, whether you have insurance or you don't, whether you have money or you don't. It's where I happen to be a patient. It is a facility that serves people who have come here from many other countries, and they just do amazing work with the fairly limited resources that they have. They have created a mobile coronavirus testing van so that they're able to go to where homeless people actually are living. And this is really meant primarily for people who are not in a shelter setting, but who might be camping out or who knows where. And the primary logic is that because the homeless population is at greater risk and it's harder for them to socially distance, better to go to where they are rather than ask them to come to a testing facility where they might actually bring an infection with them and possibly spread it, or vice versa. So the folks at the community health centers of Burlington, they basically load up the testing equipment, goggles, boots, all the masks, visors, in order to safely conduct the testing. They're able to make a referral for testing purposes right on the spot. So that's really been great. And they've been able to do a few dozen tests so far, as I understand it. And they're willing to basically travel to wherever the homeless individuals are. Number two, you may have seen in the news recently the Holiday Inn in South Burlington. This is the Holiday Inn not far from the University of Vermont campus. It's basically dedicating a wing to be a COVID recovery center. So what that means is that anyone who has tested positive for COVID-19 and who is either homeless or lives in a group home setting where social distancing isn't possible, that this is where they will be able to go to be in a sort of quarantine and be properly looked after and have all the other services that they need delivered safely on site. Brian Pine and Liz Curry, who are two people part of the Burlington community, well known, are the ones managing that effort. And a lot of credit goes to Larkin Hospitality, which owns the Holiday Inn and several other hotels. And Nate Germond, who's the general manager there, happens to be a former roommate of mine. I'm very proud of him for his role working with CVOEO, Brian and Liz, and making sure that that facility is available to meet these needs. As always, we hope it is unnecessary, but they have been very flexible to create this space in case it is needed. Good Samaritan Haven is a homeless shelter and service provider in Barrie. Rick DeAngelis, who I know from the old days working at the Vermont Housing Conservation Board, him, not me, he is the executive director of Good Samaritan Haven, and they quickly realized they needed to get out of the normal facility they had so that people could be more safely distanced, and quickly moved everyone over to a motel, and I think they may have even gone to two at this point. But a really swift action to keep people safe. They did not wait for the problem to grow. They quickly moved, took action, and it's just been really beneficial, I think, to all the people that they serve. Champlain Housing Trust, in one of my first updates, I mentioned how Champlain Housing Trust was making space available at Harbor Place in Shelburne for people who had not tested positive, but who had some symptoms and needed to be isolated for a time period. And so I know that at first that was a source of conflict with some in the community, and it certainly was a quick turn of events. But CHT, the town of Shelburne, and the community members have, I think, stepped up to support keeping people safe in that setting. COTS, they have a facility right down the street from me, has done a wonderful job continuing to provide services broadly throughout Burlington and the surrounding communities, keeping people as distant as possible, making sure their meals are coming to them safely, making sure they can get to medical appointments, and continuing to provide shelter where it's safe for them to do so. And then finally, a new place, which is the former Burlington Emergency Shelter on North Street. They needed to get people out of their facility because it was too cramped in light of this pandemic, and quickly were able to work with Champlain Housing Trust and the state's Department of Building and General Services to set up sort of individual campers that have been placed on what is normally the campground at North Beach on North Avenue in Burlington. Again, proactive, didn't wait for the problem to take hold before coming up with a solution that would keep people safer. So throughout the ranks of the organizations that serve people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, and the partner nonprofit housing organizations, and in some cases the private partners like Larkin Hospitality, it's really been great. And I don't know what the final story will be. We have some distance to go before this thing is behind us, but I know that the efforts that all of these groups have been making is really going to pay dividends. And it is worth noting that each year in our state budget, we provide funds to support these organizations. So they're always doing really important work. And sometimes there's proposals to cut the funds. And we often fight back those proposals, in part because we know that at moments like this, you need the infrastructure, you need the people who do the work, you need the facilities, you need the services, and you can't invent that easily on the fly. And so a huge kudos to all those who are working on that, which also includes staff at the Department of Children and Families and the Department of Housing and Community Development for the state. They've been great partners in all this. So now I'd like to just talk a little bit about one of the things that is really important to me, and I know many of you because of your calls and emails to me, which is the issue of making sure that people who work in frontline positions where people are at heightened risk get some kind of monetary recognition of the work that they're doing and the risk that they're putting themselves at. So the problem first rose when the federal government passed its relief bill, and we learned that the benefit for those who become unemployed would be the conventional unemployment benefit and also a $600 bump in pay per week. That is wonderful news for those who are out of work, who are desperately needing resources to pay the bills and so on. But what it did for many employees, and for most employees making, I think, less than $50,000 a year or so, is that it created an odd situation where people who were showing up for work were actually making less money than their counterpart who may be home collecting the unemployment benefit with the $600 booster because maybe their kid is home from school or from childcare, which are eligible bases for being on unemployment right now. And so it created this financial inequity where those who are still putting themselves at risk and going to work are actually the worse off financially and seem to be the ones who aren't getting any consideration. So it is our goal to find a way to do something about that problem. And I'm not sure that we're going to solve it easily, but I have delegated to 4 senators that I serve with the task of brainstorming what it might look like to provide some kind of hazard pay or hero pay. People can call it whatever they want. The point is it's to make things fairer and to recognize the sacrifice people have been making. I'm going to talk a little bit about the considerations that go into this, because I've had some constituents say, well, why haven't you already done it? Why, just come up with a number and give it to all the people who qualify. And I'm with them in spirit when they say that, but it is not so straightforward to design a program from scratch effectively instantaneously. And so there do have to be some design elements before moving forward with any such program. So let me walk through some of the things we're thinking about as we try to work with our House counterparts in the governor's team on some kind of hazard pay benefit. The first is who should get it. And that is at first not an easy answer, actually. For the people who are working remotely, for instance, they're obviously not at a particularly high level of risk compared to everybody else. People who maybe work for an essential employer, but they're in a position that doesn't make them interact with anyone. You could be doing all your work at a computer in a fairly isolated setting. Is that the kind of person who we're thinking about in terms of hazard pay? Some people may say yes, others will say no. Um, Someone who's making $200,000 a year who happens to be in a higher risk profession, and this is another challenging one. Should a surgeon at a hospital qualify for hazard pay if the dollars that we have for this benefit would be rather limited, or would we prioritize them elsewhere? And then it's just the question of, with so many job titles, how do you decide which ones are truly at risk? And so I'll just tell you a little bit about the thinking that we've been doing about who really meets that test, the straight face test of being at risk. And some of them are, I think, rather obvious in this moment, but people who work in grocery stores, who are interacting with customers or stocking shelves where it's virtually impossible to create the 6-foot distancing that's recommended, people who work in open pharmacies that are open, the retail settings, which are considered essential, where people are at the register or they're having to come out and help customers carry things and interact, delivery people, everything from our convenience stores, retailers, restaurants that are still doing some food service, they're all requiring people to show up and transport goods to and from. Trash haulers, recycle people, the ones who are either at the facilities or on the road crews coming and picking up curbside. Janitorial staff, who are basically coming in direct contact with whatever residue has been left on every surface in every place that's got human traffic going through it. People who work in assisted living and residential care settings, nursing homes, all the places that require a lot of people, and a lot of them don't make a lot of money, but they're directly interacting with the people that they care for and who are housed at the facilities they work. People who work in homeless shelters, like the groups that I've described earlier, health centers. There's a wide range of positions at our health clinics and health centers and hospitals. Our designated agencies are the organizations that do substance treatment and mental health. Home care workers, people who actually go in and have to provide one-on-one care in people's homes because they need help with elements of daily living. So those are all sort of interactions that can't be avoided. And many of the positions I just described, you can imagine, they're not people getting rich doing the work they do. They're at the lower end of the pay scale in general. And that's kind of the ballpark that we're thinking. Another question is, who should pay for this? Is this something the state of Vermont could pay for? Or is it something we should try to get the federal money and use it for that? And I'll tell you that the number of people who fit into the categories who are in these high-risk positions, who I think really do merit hazard pay, it's several tens of thousands. So to make a benefit be meaningful of more than a couple $100, say, a week, we're talking about many, 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 many millions, like the kind of millions that we don't usually talk about in the legislature because we never have enough money for anything. So what we're really thinking is that, to the extent federal funds that are coming in as part of the different Relief Act bills would be the best option that we would have, because we don't really believe we have enough funds in Vermont alone to do it. So we've got to see what flexibility there is in the federal money, and maybe we can pull it together. Then there's a question of how we actually would administer something. It's not like we would just be doing what the federal treasury does, sending everybody a check of X number of dollars. We're talking about a program that would have to be fairly customized, because it would not apply to all employers or their employees. We'd have to know whether it was going to people who were under a certain income level or not, and whether they work full-time or part-time. There's a lot of mechanical questions, and state government right now has got its hands full with so many things, including unemployment insurance and dealing with the health crisis, all that. Would it be appropriate to layer on another new activity with a real time sensitivity to it? That also is an important question. What could we do quick enough that it will actually start rewarding people while the work is being done? If a month from now, I don't even want to say it, but if a month from now the stay-at-home order was lifted and many people were back at work, it wouldn't, I don't think, feel right that the state government couldn't respond before that happened to provide the kind of encouragement and recognition that we're talking about. So how quickly something could be stood up is another important question. And just to put in perspective why this issue is so important, the $600 a week boost in pay that goes to all who collect either conventional unemployment or the sole proprietor independent contractor benefit, which is supposed to start getting paid out as soon as next Monday. If you think about what $600 a week means, that's $15 an hour for a 40-hour work week. So imagine how many people do not make $15 an hour in Vermont. It's like several tens of thousands. So right there, you can understand the scale of the inequity that's been created for many of these individuals. That if they had a kid and could stay home and collect the benefit, they'd be effectively collecting $15 an hour a week, which is probably more than they're making that many positions pay right now. So that's really the why of it. The why is that it's an attempt to create some fairness. Our hope is the federal government, in one of its next actions, will actually recognize that they've created this dynamic and put the money out there to solve it. They have the resources to make our lives much, much, much easier in the absence of their support. I'm not sure the extent to which we could do something very meaningful, though we'll still try. So stay tuned. Our team of 4 senators has come up. They've really started to sharpen the idea. They're reaching out to our House counterparts and also the folks who are in the administration to talk to them about how we might move forward, because we would need everybody to be on board to make something happen quickly and efficiently. So stay tuned. I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful, but I really believe that this is the right and just thing to do. So I'm hopeful that we'll all coalesce around something and make it work. So that's going to be a wrap for today. Thanks for joining me. I'll tell you, we're going to be having a all Senate call on Thursday morning at 8:30. And when I say all Senate, every one of the 30 senators has, on a couple times a week, been getting together on Zoom for a check-in where all 30 of us are able to raise issues, answer questions for one another. It's viewable on YouTube in real time. And this one will feature the head of the Bankers Association and the lead person at Vermont's Office of the Small Business Administration, the U.S. Small Business Administration. They're going to talk about all of the financial tools that are available through the federal relief bills that go through local banks, which is most of them. And so the first part of our discussion on Thursday morning at 8:30 will focus on those benefits. That'll go till about 9:15. Then on Friday morning, we will have our second ever in Vermont's history remote Senate session, where we'll be voting on a couple bills that are urgently needed because of the crisis related to how our government operations committee. So they will be establishing some bills to allow people to get married remotely in the short term. Healthcare workers right now can't get married remotely, but many of them are wanting very quickly to formalize their relationship in case something happens to one or the other, and have the rights that come with being married. So that's one. We'll have probably a couple bills coming out of our education committee. So at 10:30 on Friday morning, you can watch the full Senate operating remotely, debating bills and conducting business. That's also going to be viewable on a YouTube channel in real time. So Thursday morning, 8:30, full Senate. Friday, the Senate session, official session, will be at 10:30. You can go to the legislature's website and see either of those. So with that, I'm going to wrap, and I hope to see you tomorrow, and I hope you continue to stay safe.